the people that are pushing, like the mobs that actually are pushing for a Palestinian state in France and in England and in Canada, those mobs, either they're just, bought and paid for, or just hate Jews, and that's why they're doing it. But the ones that are really pushing for a Palestinian state, they're doing so because they know that it'll destroy Israel. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want Israel gone, and they see this as a method to destroy Israel. But the ones who actually have to live in a Palestinian state, the ones who actually live there on the ground, they don't want it any more than Israel does. And so I think it's just a question of, there's so much noise out there and so much misinformation and so many people who get up and spout about the importance of, of a Palestinian state don't understand. It's the worst thing for the Palestinian people, let alone for Israel. What I care about is that the Jewish people should be educated. They should know their history. They should know what God expects of them. They should understand that we have a 3,500-year history in this land, that this is essentially connected to the biblical covenant. There's no such thing as a biblical covenant to the Jewish people that doesn't have as a component being in the land of Israel.
Welcome to the Viktor Frankl Podcast. I'm Rabbi Daniel Schonbuch, joined by my co-host, attorney Lori Fein. Today, we're honored to speak with Ambassador David Friedman, who is the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, key architect of the Abraham Accords, orchestrator of the embassy move to Jerusalem, and author of One Jewish State, the last best hope to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Ambassador Friedman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's great to be with you.
Before we jump into the dangers of a Palestinian state and your vision of a Jewish state, I want to talk to you about the dangers of Zohran Mamdani. Let me read a tweet that you recently put out that said, "To the residents of New York City, in which I worked for almost 40 years, don't let an Israel-hating racist hypocrite like Mamdani get even close to Grace C. Mansion. I'm praying for you." What are your thoughts about Mamdani?
What's scary about it is that he is he obviously is hostile to Israel to the point of advocating boycotts of Israel. He's, I think, a founder of Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a racist, hostile organization. But what's most noteworthy about it is none of this has anything to do with running New York, right? So the fact that he is campaigning on these platforms of, I'm going to arrest Netanyahu if he shows up, or we're gonna somehow boycott Israel. I mean, come on, Israel is a big issue, but not for New York City. So obviously he sees it as politically advantageous. And that scares me. The fact that he thinks he can win an election in a city with more Jews than anywhere else in the world, right? There's more Jews in New York than there are in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. It is frightening. Now, in practical terms, I was just talking to somebody. They said, look, when people understand how bad he is, maybe 4 years later, things will get better. I mean, you can make the case that the best thing that happened to Trump was 4 years of Biden, so people understood, what the risks were, what the downside was, and he came in, with a head of steam because of that. I don't know. I mean, the one thing that scares me about Mamdani is, if you're a cop, or if you're the family of a cop, and you're telling your kid whether to join the police force, and he's going to go to work, and the parents of police officers, they're not afraid to risk their lives. What they are concerned about is that after they do risk their lives, protecting Americans, protecting New Yorkers, that somehow they'll be vilified for it, they'll be prosecuted for it, they'll lose their pensions for it. So that is a huge issue, because at the end of the day, if the police in New York are not motivated to do their job in a city with as many Jews as New York, the anti-Semites are going to have a field day. And I'm very frightened about that.
So what you're basically saying is that Jews in New York and New Yorkers could be in danger if a guy like Mamdani wins and actually defunds the police.
Very much so, yes.
I think that speaks to another problem that we've seen, which is, where have the Jewish leaders, the Jewish organizations been? I have not seen a condemnation yet from UJA, from JCRC, or from any of the main leading organizations. It's almost as though they're afraid to say what they absolutely must be saying in private.
Well, look, I've gotten in trouble in the past for picking on some of these organizations. I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but
Nor do I.
But I think as a general matter, and this is not just limited to New York City politics, um, these organizations are structured in a way that they depend very much on donors. Donors, if you are an organization that is relying on donors, especially a broad range of donors, you'd be advised to stay out of politics because at the end of the day, you might offend a couple of people and lose some big fight. I think a lot of that is what's behind it. Uh, I can't imagine anybody in organized Jewish leadership is not very, very, very concerned about the possibility of a Mamdani mayor, but they'll go as far as they can without jeopardizing the funding of their organizations, and that's a shame. But that's the reality.
So you think that the funders actually support Mamdani?
No, I think the funders are, I think again, such a diverse group of people. It's hard to generalize, but I think there is a school of thought that says, a Jewish organization should not be, crosswise with a political leader, at least on the left. I mean, obviously, there are lots of Jewish organizations that were crosswise with Trump, but I think on the other side of it, there's much more of a reluctance to do it. And again, I don't know the internal plumbing of these organizations, how they work, what they do. I mean, on the other side of it, I'll say that anybody willing to devote their lives and their careers in any way to helping to protect, Jewish people. I mean, I'm not there. There are some good things about what they do, but you're right. We have not been well served, I think, generally speaking, by the organized Jewish world.
There's another thing that you have been very forward on, and that's obviously your book, your promotion of one Jewish state, more or less, some might say an end to Oslo and a revamping of our vision for what we see for Israel in the Middle East. That is something that I think also has been, the broader Jewish community has been slow to adopt. But I would love for you to just, first of all, tell our listeners what your vision is and how you came to it and how it differs from what we've seen in the past.
Sure. Well. One Jewish State, as you might imagine, is a book that advocates Israeli sovereignty, Jewish sovereignty, over the entirety of what people would call Green Line Israel, as well as Judea and Samaria. I probably could make the case for Gaza as well, but because as I was writing this book, as even at this point, Gaza is still so much in flux. I'd rather not, speak about something which is certainly not a work in progress. But Judea and Samaria, which is the heart of biblical Israel, I advocate for Israeli sovereignty over it. Now, what's important about it is about the book, I think, is I try to analyze it from every vector that somebody would care about. So some people care very much about biblical Israel. They view Israel as a special place, a holy place. They believe that places like Hebron and Shiloh and Beit El and obviously Jerusalem, must be part of sovereign Israel. It was promised to the Jewish people by God in the works of the Old Testament and in the prophecies of Jeremiah and Isaiah and Yechezkel and so there's a lot of people just that's what they care about, right? And that's fine. I care about that too. But so I make the biblical argument for Israeli sovereignty and the promises and the covenants of God. But then I say, okay, not everybody sees the world that way. So let's talk about it from the perspective of Israel's national security. Let's say you just want Israel to be secure. You don't really care so much about the biblical points. Well, I make the argument that why, from a perspective of national security, Israel cannot be secure unless it has complete sovereignty over Judea and Samaria for a host of geopolitical, military, tactical reasons. Then, okay, well, maybe you're not really particularly interested in that issue either. What if you just care about something like human rights or freedom of religion, right? Which, a lot of people care about. Well, my point is, there's only one sovereign in the Middle East that has a track record of protecting the religious rights of all faiths. Best example, of course, being the old city of Jerusalem, where people who are Christian, Muslim, and Jewish under Israeli sovereignty, because Israel's already asserted its sovereignty over Eastern Jerusalem. It's the only place in the world where you have I mean, again, it's not perfect, and it's not like there aren't, occasional outbursts. But basically, on any given day, you've got Christians, Jews, and Muslims worshiping in an incredibly small holy place, series of holy places, and it all works. So that's sort of religious freedom. Now, let's say you care about, about minority rights. Let's say you care only about the Palestinians. Let's say that's all you care about. You say, you know what? I don't like this. I don't like this whole set of circumstances. The Palestinians aren't treated well. So the only sovereign in the region that has an actual track record of empowering Palestinians, I mean, in this case, Israeli citizens who live inside the Green Line, is Israel. There's about 20% of Israel is Arab, right? More than 20% of the students at all the elite universities in Israel, there's the Technion, or it's Tel Aviv University, or Hebrew University, or Haifa University, more than 20% are Arab, right? They have risen inside Israel to the highest echelons of law, of medicine, of politics, even the military. So, Israel knows how to do it. And so then people say, okay, but, the question everyone asks, well, okay, you're going to absorb all the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria? Are they going to vote in a national election? My argument is no. My argument is no. We need to have one Jewish state, right? One Jewish state, not two, not four, not five. There's 25 Muslim states. There's all kinds of other states of national religions. It's got to remain the single Jewish state. Now, will Palestinians who live inside of Israel, they vote. I mean, that's a different issue. Not trying to change that. But, the 2 million or so plus minus Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, no, we will work to create, local autonomy, human dignity, human rights, a Bill of Rights, all kinds of protections, minority protections, but not to select the leader of the one Jewish state. So, and people say, well, you can't do that because then you have an apartheid state. And I said, no, it's not an apartheid state. I mean, it's nothing resembling. If you study apartheid, it has nothing to do with it. But as a matter of fact, if you're going to say that's apartheid, then you really need to look in the mirror in America, because in America, we have sovereignty over places like Puerto Rico and Guam and American Samoa, where we're the sovereign. America is the sovereign, and the people who live there do not vote in our national elections. So it's not like we made this up just for these poor Palestinians. And I would point out that today, especially, at a time when there was just an article today in I think it was JNS by a friend of mine, Mayor Ben Shabbat, who's the former head of the National Security Council of Israel. Hamas is extraordinarily popular right now in Judea and Samaria among Palestinians. So this is certainly not the time to be, providing, the type of autonomy that a citizen would have to these people. I mean, it's a long road to go down to begin to separate and hopefully encourage Palestinians to be less hostile to Israel. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not like Israel becomes the sovereign and all the problems are solved. But it is the pathway by which Israel can deliver, I think, human dignity, better rights, better opportunities, better healthcare, better education, in a way that hopefully over time, again, I really emphasize the words over time, can begin to, de-radicalize the Palestinian population. So that's the long-winded vision. It's not short.
Do you see yourself getting more support? Do you see the concept growing in its support? I mean, all of us are looking at Macron and Starmer and all of Europe really lining up to come to America, to the UN General Assembly, and announce their support for a Palestinian state. And of course, we're horrified at the idea that somebody would unilaterally create this faux state. On the other hand, do you have support even within Israel or within the larger Jewish community for your one state idea?
Well, I have support for sure. Is it as robust as I'd like? No, not yet. I mean, look, inside of Israel, 90+% of Israelis have given up on a Palestinian state after October 7th. So the fact that you're not going to have a Palestinian state is almost, at this point, it's almost accepted universally, and including people on the left. Of those who are against the Palestinian state, how many of those would support one Jewish state? A lot. I mean, a lot. Again, I would say at least half.
Of
How do you do
Israelis, you mean?
of Israelis? Yeah. How do you do? By the way, Arabs too. I mean, Arab Israelis too. How do you get there? Um, what? Yeah, it's very. I worked on this when I was ambassador. I mean, it's complicated. How you absorb? What rights do they have? Who pays for it? To me, I think it's really important to make this part of an expansion of the Abraham Accords because I think in that context you can get buy-in from players who really matter, and I haven't given up on convincing the Emirates and the Saudis and others that this really is the best outcome. By the way, I mean I've met with just recently I was in Israel and I met with a bunch of sheikhs of Hebron, and it got some press. Not my meeting, but some meetings before that. I mean, they are prepared to. Some of them are prepared to recognize Israel is a Jewish state, in the entirety of the land of Israel, as long as they have their own, if you will, kind of they like to call it an emirate, but whatever you call it, they want to have control over their particular, city. And Hebron's a very interesting city. It's a very wealthy city. It has a very strong, internal governance. They're not afraid of. They hate the Palestinian Authority. They think they're completely corrupt, but they don't fear them because they have their own strength as a city. Obviously, Hebron's an incredibly important place biblically. There are people on both sides who are ready to talk about this. I think, October 7th changed a lot of points of view. As most of the people who perished were people who were strong believers in a two-state solution, right? They were living down in the south on the periphery. They worked with Palestinians. They wanted to help them and empower them, and they gave them jobs, and they wanted to, give them rights and statehood. And we saw how that turned out. So there is, I think there is a movement behind it. And look, it just needs a little bit of work. We have to end the war. I mean, as long as it's very hard to do anything under fire, as long as there's a war going on, it's very hard to really deal with this type of a diplomatic outcome. But I'm pretty sure it is the most likely outcome going forward. And if you heard the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, he gave a speech at there was a speech, I don't know where it was held, but they celebrated 17 new communities in Judea and Samaria, and Yisrael Gantz, who's the head of the community there in Mateh Binyamin, was honored there. This is I think it's moving ahead, and I think it's the right outcome.
So I think what you're proposing is a real alternative to Camp David Accords, to Oslo. This is a totally new vision for the
Yes.
Middle East, combined with the power of what you witnessed under the first Trump administration of the signing of the Abraham Accords. What do you think the Trump administration is going to do next when all these leaders from around the world are coming to the United Nations declaring a Palestinian state? What's the next move?
I don't think Trump cares at all about what they do. I mean, he's not one to care normally, and I think he understands that whether it's France, whether it's the UK, whether it's Canada. I hate to say it; it pains me to say it, but these are fast becoming failed states. They're fast becoming irrelevant. They're fast becoming nations that failed to control their borders. They allowed massive amount of not just Islamic immigration, which is not something I have a problem with, but Islamist immigration. Radical Islamists came into these countries and now have huge control. I mean, I'm told, I haven't checked this out, but the vast majority of mayors in the UK are Muslim. I mean, it's really gotten out of control. So they're placating their most kind of violent, political base. And I think Trump gets that, and we all get that, and that's a shame. I was happy to see that. I think Germany looked like they were heading in that direction. They just decided, I think, not to go that way. But look, what are they going to do? They're going to bring something up at the Security Council. It's going to get vetoed by the United States. I've no doubt. And I think Western Europe is unfortunately, because we used to have, many of us have family there. Many of us have great memories of, England and France and especially Canada. I have family from Canada. I think that is fast becoming irrelevant. If you would have told me 20 years ago that Western Europe would become anti-Israel and Eastern Europe would become more friendly to Israel, like Hungary, right, and Czechoslovakia, or Czech Republic, and even Poland are becoming more friendly to Israel. I say it's crazy. It can't be, but that's where we are right now. So um, at the end of the day, I think Eastern Europe, the Gulf, to some extent, maybe in the future, China or Russia, that's really where I think the power is going to be in terms of the influence is going to be on the Middle East. And I think we should, we in the Trump administration, myself, a former member of the Trump administration, we should try to get ahead of it, rather than following. We should try to get ahead of it. And I think one Jewish state is the solution to at least to the immediate Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
That's excellent. Well, it's actually so inspiring to hear something that has hope, because when you speak to people about Oslo and about two states, it's nothing but depressing.
Right.
You see where that led. I think one thing that I find very interesting is that people say, well, what about democracy? What about self-rule? And yet you see in Gaza, immediately Hamas took over and never had another election. In Judea and Samaria, Abbas was elected and then never again had another election. And yet somehow that is considered democracy by people, whereas having an actual democracy that allows local self-rule to be turned over and self-selected is somehow not. Is there a way that you would say we could convince other people, or what we would be able to do to, why do you think it is that people can't see that?
Well, first of all, I don't think people really understand what it means to be a Palestinian. There is no, historically, there's no Palestinian people, but that's not really my most important point. There really is no Palestinian culture. There's nothing that's uniquely Palestinian about the culture, about the faith, about the values, about the territory. And that's why a Palestinian state is something which just cobbles together, tribes from various areas. Like the people in Hebron want nothing to do with the people in Ramallah, right? The people in Jenin have nothing to do with the people in Tulkarm. It's not. This is not a people. These are a series of tribes that really are best suited to localized rule within their own communities. It makes sense for them. It's not just a way of Israel kind of brushing them aside and saying, look, you can have your own towns, but you can't participate in a national election. It's also what makes sense for them. They hate the Palestinian Authority. They consider it to be ineffective and corrupt. Some of them like Hamas, but not, some of them don't. Most of them, like most people, want to know that they can, live their lives, not be harassed. Mostly the harassment comes from their own people, not from Israel, but not be harassed. Have businesses. One of the big issues, like they complain about, we make things, we can't sell them because we're landlocked. We can't get our stuff out to a port. We can't get supplies in. These are like not ideological issues. These are issues that are solvable under the right circumstances. So, I think the problem with the people that get it, the people that are pushing, like the mobs that actually are pushing for a Palestinian state in France and in England and in Canada, those mobs, either they're just, bought and paid for, or just hate Jews, and that's why they're doing it. But the ones that are really pushing for a Palestinian state, they're doing so because they know that it'll destroy Israel. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want Israel gone, and they see this as a method to destroy Israel. But the ones who actually have to live in a Palestinian state, the ones who actually live there on the ground, they don't want it any more than Israel does. And so I think it's just a question of there's so much noise out there and so much misinformation, and so many people who get up and spout about the importance of a Palestinian state don't understand. It's the worst thing for the Palestinian people, let alone for Israel. And the real audience that I think is important, I think if we can get to them, are kind of basically nonviolent Palestinians who just want to talk about how they can have, do what everybody wants, be safe, have good education and healthcare, get their kids, on track to a better life. It's pretty much all it is. And we worked on that when I was in the first administration. I think we can get there if we can. If we got to lower the antagonism a little bit. I mean, the war doesn't help. I mean, and again, I think Israel's done a magnificent job in the war. I think they've done everything they can to avoid civilian casualties. But but it's still a war, and as long as there's a war, people unfortunately are going to get killed, and it makes it harder to really have civilized discussions. But hopefully, the war will end. With the resounding Israeli victory, the hostages will be returned, and we can move on to something that's forward-looking.
It sounds like these extreme violent protesters that we see on college campuses and in city streets are actually in opposition to many Palestinians that just want to live within Israel and have a decent life. And that's kind of the vision of one Jewish state, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, the, I'm not smart enough to figure out what they really want, but it is no coincidence that they all popped up on October 8th, right? That was before Israel even responded to the war. I mean, Israel was grieving then, licking their wounds, and these people were already, mobilizing, talking about, Palestine from the river to the sea. They all the leaders, they all get up and talk. They all look like this. They all talk, and they talk their talking points from the same iPhone. They're all getting instructions what to say from, the central command. All the tents happen to look the same. I mean, just how is it everybody got a tent and it looks identical to every other tent? So we got surprised both militarily and really on the PR front. I mean, we still haven't recovered from the incredible success of the anti-Israel PR campaign. It was very well orchestrated and obviously highly funded. But I don't think any of those people have a clue what it's like to live in, Judea and Samaria, to live in Israel. They don't know anything. They've been given talking points, and anti-Semitism is something which resonates with a lot of people. And boy, did they get out ahead of us on that.
Do you have a perspective on what should be done, either by ordinary people who support Israel or by leadership, to improve that?
Yeah, it's not like there's not a lot of, if you want to find stuff that's pro-Israel, it's not like you can't find it, right? You can follow me, you can follow 50 other people, you can follow you. I mean, there's lots of. I'm not an expert in why we're doing so badly. I mean, the craziness is that Israel's been accused of presiding over a famine, and there hasn't been a picture on the front page of a single child in Gaza who's legitimately starving. I mean, they get these pictures of people who have genetic disorders, who have bloated stomachs, nothing to do with food, having to do with, unfortunately, someone. I mean, these poor people are being used for, to make a point that's false. That's a fake point. Gaza's being flooded with food. I mean, is it getting distributed properly? No, because the UN is failing on the job, and it's left in other hands. But there's no forced famine at all. If there were pictures of hungry kids, you'd see it. I mean, you'd see it all over the press. It's not. You can't find a picture of a single legitimately starving kid. But it doesn't matter. Everybody has bought into the narrative that there's a famine going on. So look. My view is a little. I don't focus so much on PR, on Hasbara. What I care about is that the Jewish people should be educated. They should know their history. They should know what God expects of them. They should understand that we have a 3,500-year history in this land. That this is essentially connected to the biblical covenant. There's no such thing as a biblical covenant to the Jewish people that doesn't have as a component being in the land of Israel. And there's no notion of a punishment to the Jewish people that doesn't include being expelled from the land. The land is inextricably intertwined with the Jewish faith, and we have to keep that land. We don't have a faith if we. Certainly, I mean, God forbid we were expelled. That's happened many times. But if we voluntarily give up our biblical homeland, we don't have a faith anymore. And so I think, I believe that Jewish people need to be strong and proud and do what's right and do what God asks them to do, especially especially, and that's the point of my book, especially because it happens to be the best outcome for all the inhabitants of the land. And even if you only care about the Palestinians, it's still the best outcome for all the inhabitants of the land. I'll keep making that point as long as I have some breath in me, and I think that's really what's important. Fighting anti-Semitism, we got to do that, but lots of other people can do that better than me. I'll do my share, but I think the Jewish people, coupled with our friends, we have some great allies. We have some great friends in the evangelical world. We have some great friends of other faiths. We've got the Druze who are, tremendous friends of Israel. I mean, we want to hold them tight and hug them all, but it's all about, it's up to us. It's up to the Jewish people. We're the ones being tested, whether we have the resolve to stand up for our values and our faith, our relationship with God, for the texts that have, rang true across the world for 3,000 plus years. The Bible is still the most popular book. It sells like 2,000 copies an hour. The Bible, it still matters to a lot of people. It has to matter to us. God, God help us if the Bible doesn't matter to us. So that's where I spend my time, and I'm, I hope people jump on board.
Ambassador Friedman, you already witnessed the miracle of the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and we're all hoping that your new book, One Jewish State, will be the new miracle of the future. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Viktor Frankl Podcast.
Well, thank you so much. And it's a great name, because that was one of the first books that I read in high school, and never gets old, Man's Search for Meaning. So thank you very much.
Welcome.